Shadow the Hedgehog is the sequel to 1991's Sonic the Hedgehog. Shut up, yes it is. With the release of the third Sonic film upon us, continuing to hold the entire weight of the Sonic franchise on its back, Shadow Fever is about to hit the world all over again, and after years of the games really wasting or misusing Shadow, I'm beyond ready for it. So what better game to revisit in a video like this than his focal entry in 2005, Shadow the Hedgehog. Well, some might say Sonic Adventure 2, the game that the movie is directly drawing from in a lot of aspects, but that's not as fun. This video will be structured similarly to my video on Sonic the Hedgehog of the same name that nobody saw. I looked at the view count and of course decided to make another one, because the only time I ever stepped foot inside of a business class was to use their printer because it was the only one on that floor at my school. Shadow is a weird game to look back at because I don't think a game like this would or even could be made today. Games aimed at kids feel like they're trying so hard not to do anything that could be considered inappropriate. And I think, to an extent, that's probably a good thing. But I also think a hedgehog shooting people with a gun deserves more than one game ever in history. Just think about that. We've had 100 Souls-likes, but not one hedgehog shooting people with a gun's-like. And I think that's a great loss to the arts. I want to clarify, I am not advocating for letting kids play games where you shoot people with guns, although, if we're all of the agreement here that video games do not cause violence, what would be the problem? Shadow was a game that tried to target older audiences, but I think ended up as a game played mainly by kids, thinking they were being edgy and cool, which maybe was their actual plan all along. Kids can't play GTA, but they can play a spin-off of Sonic the Hedgehog that might sate those same psychotic desires that exist within us all. I hadn't played this game since 2005, or maybe, I don't know, 2006. I played it as a kid, but always got stuck or bored and ended up going back to either Heroes or the Sonic Adventure games. So honestly, this was my first time finishing the game, or seeing most of the stages, of which there are lots. More on that later. The tone of this game is set upon booting it up. A whole ass official AMV, animated in, honestly, pretty gorgeous CGI. This holds up partly because it's dripping in style, from the way that it uses colour to the gleam on the metals and the way the bright moon beams down on everything. This animation is unashamed of what it is, and Shadow is taken absolutely seriously. I think this was the charm of those first few 3D Sonic games. Before things got self-aware and sanded down, it was rough, it was edgy, and most of all, it was earnest. This introduction, along with the backing track I Am by Crush 40, absolutely invites you in. This is the exact sort of thing dreamt up in the heads of 13-year-olds when thinking about Shadow the Hedgehog, probably including the pump-action SMG. This final shot sort of straight up says, "Oh, you thought Sonic was for babies? You grew out of these kids' games? Well, we just fucking killed him! With a gun!" I want to say you'd never catch Shadow doing anything like this these days, but they did let him have a gun in the movie, so someone did something right. All they need to do now is let him say fuck, and you've won yourself an Oscar. Honestly, I think after Sonic 3, if they made an R-rated Shadow film, they would rake in billions of dollars. Okay, maybe not billions, but they'd make bank off of it. They won't do it, because it'd, harm the brand, but come on. I think anyone who dislikes Shadow the Hedgehog on the premise alone is kidding themselves. This concept is awesome, and goes incredibly fucking hard. Indulging in the edge of Shadow in 2005 was such a clever idea, but the issue is that the game, I think this premise is also particularly difficult to pull off because of how Sonic Adventure 2 ended and what they did in Heroes, both of which are meant to be canon to this game, but Heroes confuses things a bit with the whole cloning reveal at the end. I think Sonic Adventure 2's intent was for Shadow to be a one-and-done character, with his death at the end being symbolic and meaningful and really affecting the way characters viewed each other and their own sense of self. But Shadow was really fucking popular, and so they brought him back through cloning, and Heroes revealed there were a ton of Shadows, which is why this one had no memory and could revert back to the pre-character development Shadow, and that's basically where we open Shadow the Hedgehog. They do a lot of legwork so that this Shadow can be a blank slate like he was at the start of Sonic Adventure 2. He has brief memories of a girl called Maria.
And that gruesome image.
And a general disdain for, well, everything.
Look how pathetic they are. I don't have time for these humans.
Black Doom, a character that now exists and an alien, tells Shadow if he collects the 7 Chaos Emeralds, as promised, he will reveal his past so Shadow can find clarity. And that's the opener. That's the context. Black Doom's trademarked black creatures rain down on the city of Westopolis, and the game begins. The full story we feel out as we make our way through the various stages. Now, the interesting part about Shadow the Hedgehog is how it's structured. Before the game came out, their tagline was, "Hero or villain, you decide." Choice was a huge part of this game, and so each level, instead of having just one goal ring at the end, had specific tasks to complete during the levels to decide your fate, both for the story and for which stage you would play next. One mission lent in favour of Black Doom and evilness, and the other was a classic Sonic character, like for example, Sonic, and would lean towards hero-ness. You could also alternately ignore both and just race through as neutral as possible if you're a coward and don't like politics in your games. This sometimes has a greater effect on levels than others, sometimes to their benefit and sometimes to the complete opposite of the word benefit. Sonic games are first and foremost platformers, unless you're talking about this, or this, or this. Okay, but they're usually platformers, and Shadow is no different. Each level is essentially a basic platformer level with varying degrees of difficulty, from gaps to clear, to enemies to avoid or defeat, and sometimes puzzles to solve. It really does follow the same formula as that very first Sonic game. It's merely presentation that's changed, although so have the controls.
The B button lets me attack. The X button lets me spin dash and perform other actions.
I like this, by the way, it's charming. Bring back characters telling you what the different buttons do, you cowards. Break the industry-defining mold that Sony has forced on us, removing all whimsy from our game. While the structure of levels remains very similar on a foundational level, how you interact with the space is entirely different because it is, of course, three-dimensional. I know, we're breaking out the deep analysis already. One of the things I praised Sonic the Hedgehog for was its responsiveness, the tight controls, the ability to get really good at a system that felt refined. Shadow is, you'd think the go-to would be to just have the game controlled like Sonic Adventure 2, refine it a bit, and you'd have a really solid system. Sonic Adventure 2 had jank, but it was responsive and decently tight. A lot of the issues can be attributed to the growing pains of putting a character as fast as Sonic into 3D, but by 2005, surely you've ironed out any issues, right? Well, between Sonic Adventure 2 and Shadow, there was a little game called Sonic Heroes, which, let's not get it twisted, I am a huge fan of. But there's no denying the game's movement controls are a little off. Shadow basically plays exactly like Sonic Heroes. I actually wanted to say, I played a bit of Heroes to capture the footage that you're seeing here, and it controls way better than Shadow, which is shocking, to be honest. But where Heroes had the team system to allow you to switch to a different character depending on the situation, such as swapping to your flight character to navigate a tricky platform, which, to be fair, is a whole other can of worms for valid criticism, you have to navigate everything as the speed character in Shadow. Because you're Shadow, the biggest issue I find is that the controls are equally slippery and sticky. Shadow's movement feels like ice skating at points, and in a platformer you need instant control over your character, especially at high speeds. The weird thing is, stopping is instant, which is weird because in the first pass of my script I wrote that it wasn't, because it doesn't feel like it is. It feels like there's a delay, or Shadow will just slide along the ground to a stop. But he doesn't. So why did I feel like he did? I think it's due to directional control. Trying to turn while running fast is a nightmare because just like Heroes at high speeds, turning slightly will send you flying into the other direction rather than just slightly adjusting. So many times I found myself flying into enemies I couldn't avoid reliably because trying to move out of the way would send me flying into the arms of another, or not being able to avoid gaps because I couldn't reasonably stop Shadow in time, and so at points I found myself going at a snail's pace just so I didn't lose all my lives and get reset. It's strange because while Sonic Adventure 2 is absolutely not the perfect game a lot claim it to be, the controls are far tighter than they are here. It's as if they went backwards rather than developing on what they had, which might be the case because Sonic 06 controls worse than Heroes and Shadow do. It's really no wonder the boost formula put you on rails when they could clearly never get Sonic's movement in a 3D space right with the amount of freedom it needs to be done justice. Obviously there's Frontiers, but I'm not tackling the complexity of Frontiers right now, so I'll just point you to George's 5-hour monster project that I think is really fair yet critical, and didn't get enough love. The other side of this coin is the stickiness. A lot of the movement itself just isn't fluid, it doesn't flow the way it should, and so you feel a little rigid, and rather than translating to responsiveness, it actually translates to the opposite. But differently from being slippery and overshooting, here you feel like you aren't able to move quite enough, and this happens most of all during platforming. This is nowhere near as bad as Forces, which I made a video on 4 years ago during the apocalypse. Forces has horrendous stickiness and doesn't allow for any sense of fluidity. Shadow is not that bad, but I think the issue stems from a similar place, that when you're moving fast and you jump, your momentum doesn't carry forward like it did in the original Sega Mega Drive games, and so you end up either overshooting jumps or undershooting jumps incredibly often because your brain is telling you, I'm moving this fast. When I jump, I will also be moving this fast. And then you jump, and you just slow down, and so your jump feels, and this is the technical term for it, fucking weird. And so what you have is a movement system and a platforming system that don't interact with each other properly. And I think the core reason for that is a lack of real momentum. Since the Genesis days, I don't think Sonic has ever managed a true momentum system. The adventure games and then Frontiers, to an extent, might be the closest they ever got to replicating what made those original games stand out against Mario in the 90s. Most 3D Sonic games are trying to replicate the feeling those original games gave you without giving you the freedom that made it click. And on the topic of platforming, I want a fist fight in the streets with whoever designed the homing attack pre-Unleashed. I don't think there's one 3D Sonic game prior to Unleashed where the homing attack is reliable. Actually, that might not be true. I think the Wii games did have like a targeting system, didn't they? I don't know, I could look it up and check, but I don't think it matters that. Someone in the comments will tell me. Every time I used the homing attack, whether to attack an enemy or to dash to safety, it was a coin flip as to whether the game would do what I wanted or whether it would do the opposite of what I wanted. So many times I would try to attack an enemy over a gap just to fly past the enemy to my death. Or I tried to zip past the enemy into a space behind them just to wrap back around and homing attack the fucking enemy I was trying to avoid. I think this is why Unleashed allowed for boost and homing attack to be separate, meaning you could choose to dash or you could choose to home. It's one or the other and you can choose. Plus, you have a visual indication of what you're homing onto. It's fucking genius. Here, I had to hope and pray the game wasn't going to screw me over. I will say though, weirdly, grinding in this game is far more reliable than it is in any 3D Sonic game prior to this one. Switching rails is consistent, and fuck, it actually makes it fun and not an anxiety-inducing task every single time. As well as rails, you also sometimes have these things, which Eggman dubs
Red Rapid Transit Flow.
I'm so glad these things have a name, a full name. I'm so glad they thought of that, because that would have been the biggest issue, I think, if they hadn't thought of that. I found that after playing the game through, however many fucking times I played it through, I was kind of good. Still susceptible to bullshit, but I don't know. I kind of got good, but that's a result of understanding the jank and avoiding it, a matter of knowing when the game is going to fuck you over and adjusting to compensate, rather than the game being intuitive. And no matter what, I'm always going to be caught out by enemies erupting from the ground to punish me for my sins. Where in the original Sonic games, and even the early 3D era, enemies were obstacles that contributed to the platform aspects. You used them to string together attacks to cross gaps, or they were roadblocks you had to cleverly avoid, and it was harmonious in its design that played on the strengths of the game. In Shadow, they make combat a real focus, by, of course, introducing weapons. My favourite, of course, being the pump-action SMG. Shadow wants you to kill enemies. You can tell because of just how many it throws at you in levels that usually would be about dashing forward to the goal. Normally in these games, enemies are naturally a part of the environment almost. They enhance the set pieces of levels. But because Shadow wants you to pick up an assault rifle and kill everyone in sight, it sometimes just litters the areas with guys to shoot. This is reinforced by the special ability gauges for Chaos Control and Chaos Blast, which fill when defeating enemies of the corresponding faction. Killing hero troops fills the Blast gauge, killing evil troops fills the Control gauge, and one is far superior to the other. Blast kills all enemies in the vicinity, and Control allows you to zoom toward the goal, ignoring everything in sight, which functions kind of like the bullet power up in Mario Kart and is always really awesome. On top of even that, the game will have many of its missions center around killing a certain amount of enemies from specific factions, again pushing the player to slow down a little, smell the roses, and put a few rounds into everyone you come across. Weirdly though, sometimes to progress, the game will force you to kill enemies of the faction you are currently aligned with, and so I'll want to be mates with Black Doom, but to get past, I need to kill aliens to unlock a bounce pad, or when siding with Rouge, you need to use these beetles to access the searchlights, and so we're actively betraying Rouge without meaning to, which feels really messy. To add to this, Black Doom also once actively told me to switch characters, which felt equally charming and stupid at the same time. Charming because I already explained how characters explaining the game to you is really charming, but stupid because why would he be pushing me to side with fucking Knuckles to murder his alien mates? They make the guns feel really good though, and there are way more than you'd expect for a 2005 game, from your standard pistols and pump action to alien weapons, rifles, rocket launchers, and turrets, and on top of that, katanas and obscenely large Final Fantasy-esque weapons. There's even these cool bonus unlockables when you beat certain endings, like the samurai blade I mentioned before, but also the Omachow gun? Or the what? I think the reason these feel so satisfying is probably because of the lock-on and visual audio feedback, which, yeah, again, that sounds basic, that's like every shooter of all time, but it feels nice, though. When you jump and you hold that fire button and just unload so much lead into an enemy, it feels incredible. In a slapstick, cartoony kind of way. On the flip side, the game also adds vehicles, which are almost never useful, especially this one. I don't know what this is here for. The only time I found using a vehicle genuinely useful was here, on this toxic waste stuff. It's helpful to cross this terrain, but that's it. Other than that, it's really a gimmick that is always slower than just running. I think if you'd done away with this and maybe had like dedicated vehicle levels, it might have been a lot more fun. It could have also completely sucked balls and cock, but at least it would have been purpose-built for that gameplay element. They didn't even add Shadow's classic, iconic bike. The intro shows Shadow on this cool-as-fuck bike, but in the game, the only motorbike you ride is this garbage grey one. And I think that's the worst crime the game commits. I don't think these additions harm the game, but they don't particularly improve upon the Sonic gameplay model. If you want to play like you usually do, you still can, and honestly, that's probably the most fun way to play. The issue here isn't the inclusion of weapons and vehicles, it's that the levels aren't really designed in a way that allows them to shine because they function the same as the levels from SA2 or Sonic Heroes, just with more enemies and missions that will force you to do different things within the levels, and that's not always a good thing. The levels themselves, though, are on a sliding scale of pretty cool to bad. So fucking bad. The theming of them is always really strong, I feel, from cryptic castles, Halloween vibes, to Glyphic Canyons throwback vibes of something that could feel right at home in Sonic Adventure 1, or my personal favourite, Circus Park. I'm just a sucker for casino levels because of my crippling gambling addiction. If you're enjoying this video so far, by the way, feel free to join me over on Patreon for the companion piece to this video focused on Sonic X Shadow Generations, for as little as $2 to access the necessary tier. That was unrelated to my previous statement. I don't want to sit and talk about every single stage individually because realistically there are too many to reasonably do that without it becoming tedious for you and me. These levels live and die on their structuring of exploration. In a level like Mad Matrix, for example, it needs you for the hero mission to activate 4 different terminals across cyberspace. No, not yet. To do this, it has you play the first part of the level linear, and then throws you out into a hub area with 3 other towers you can interact with. You can make a dash for the tower ahead of you and finish the area by getting to the goal ring, or you could take on the other towers with interesting puzzles and platforming within to complete the optional mission for Espio. And this really allows for a level of freedom that feels organic and actually fun to play with, as each tower takes you into a different linear set piece before flinging you back out into the hub. However, you also have levels like Westopolis, in which the mission for Black Doom, for example, is to kill 35 soldiers, but the level only has 35 soldiers, and so the odds are you'll reach the end and realize, oh, I missed one, and then you have to teleport back to the start, which isn't exploration, it's tedium. On another note, Glyphic Canyon handles this objective better. For the hero mission, you have to kill 60 aliens, but the mission has far more than 60 aliens, so you can play normally without scouring every single corner for the final enemy you probably missed, which is way more fun and fluid in terms of design. But sometimes you get cool moments like finding an alternate area in Cryptic Castle where you fly a big bat guy to find the final lantern to light for Eggman, or heading past the goal ring in Westopolis, Prison Island, Digital Circuit, or Space Gadget to complete the missions for the specific characters. It adds a level of player agency and brings back that exploration element from the classic Mega Drive games that always felt so cool, like you were discovering something you maybe weren't meant to.
Prison Island might be one of the best levels, second only to Circus Park because it promotes speed, my second favourite vice.
Even when doing the hero mission for Charmy and collecting these 5 secret special discs, they aren't off the beaten path, they're just along the main one, and so you're bound to pick them up if you're being vigilant, without forcing the player to just walk and check every single corner, which translates to fun. Sadly though, most of the level's missions are bad. Central City and finding these specific bombs is horrible and incredibly difficult to navigate, with the 2 layers of the map basically mirroring each other so you can never tell which layer you're in. Lethal Highway has you trying to destroy this alien ship with Sonic, and it's such a bullet sponge. For a while I wasn't sure I was going at it right, especially when Sonic keeps telling you it's deflecting bullets. Apparently you have to just fill it with bullets, so that's awesome. Space Gadget is often totally incomprehensible. What's happening here? And don't even get me started on The Doom and Lost Impact. Holy fucking god, No Sonic level should take this long. This is obscene. They even give you a map because the place is such a fucking maze, and I still couldn't work it out. The impact being this lost left on me is immeasurable. It's kind of interesting that, in a gameplay sense, you can iron out a lot of these issues by playing the expert mode, which isn't even an expert mode necessarily. It's just every single level from the game in order with one set of lives until you finish them all in one go. I like that this honestly acts as a callback to the way you'd play the original Mega Drive games, but more so in the context of this game itself. It removes the morality, it removes the missions, and it makes every single level a single straight shot to the end, which honestly is a fun way to play. It kills all the theming and the point of the game, but it's still a pretty awesome way to play if you just want to play purely for gameplay, which I struggle to believe anyone would do that. This mode is also super weird because all the characters from the story will talk to Shadow and cheer him on, like for example, the fucking President of the United States.
Shadow, it's me again. Sorry about last time. I've been busy planning the reconstruction.
This mode is better for general gameplay, but it's still not perfect, and in a lot of areas, still pretty damn cooked, to be completely honest. These levels have atmosphere, don't get me wrong, but they are often a disaster to play through. I'm sure by this point there are a lot of people in the comments that have told me I'm wrong about the universally panned game Shadow the Hedgehog, and that it's just a skill issue. And hey, if that's true, I don't want to get good. I'm happy sucking at this, actually. Another aspect of exploration is not special stages, but special keys. Each level has these little doors you can unlock with 5 keys, which sounds incredibly familiar.
An assassin?
Unlocking them grants special things like warp portals, weapons, vehicles that are completely fucking useless, or access to turrets, and honestly, this is kinda cool. If you bother to scour levels and find these keys, you're usually rewarded with stuff that feels useful, and sometimes stuff that is the complete opposite of useful. The funniest part about these levels, though, is how they're strung together. Because of the fact you're choosing which ending to get, and that determines which level you play next, Shadow is just randomly popping up in places for no reason. And sure, Sonic Heroes did that too, as did the original games, but they didn't try to make out like there was a tangible through line. They sort of embraced the classic formula and ran with it. Shadow tries to tell a story like the adventure games, but when 3 different outcomes can happen, taking you to 3 different places, some of these routes feel hilarious and contrived as to why you'd be in a particular location. You'll be fighting Black Ball with Sonic just to suddenly be in a casino alone for no reason. I guess hedgehogs have their vices too. Or Sonic will just show up and be like, hey, so we're headed into space. Do you want to come to space? Just to enable a flashback level, and then when the flashback is done, we're sort of not sure why we're even in space, and then Sonic lore dumps about a special comet that passes every 50 years or something, and that just happens to be the comet that Black Doom is from, and so, hey, that's the next level. It's incredibly disjointed, and I'd be mad if it wasn't so funny. The crazy thing about this game, though, and I really do mean this, is that it managed to make a game with just a Sonic-like character last a reasonable length without any insane gimmicks. Sure, it has the missions, and it has the weapons, and it has the alternate paths, but this is the only modern Sonic game that doesn't fall back on a core gimmick to make itself longer. No alternate characters, no teams, no werehog, no classic stages, no fucking player avatar, no open world, just Shadow levels. And the game feels a reasonable length. It is a full game full of literally just Sonic levels, and that's kind of remarkable. Only a few bloat themselves with bullshit tasks, so many are genuinely well-made platformer levels. The things holding them back are the movement and the platforming controls, because on a design front, separate from the mission system, the levels themselves are really competently designed and remain unique throughout, other than a few alternate takes on the same environment. And on top of that, the game has so many bops, I've been using the soundtrack the whole video, and almost every stage is a banger. I love this shit. The other type of stage are the boss stages, and some are better than others, and none are remarkable at all. My least favorites are probably Black Bull and Heavy Dog or Blue Falcon, really generally boring fights, I can't lie. All their variations are slow and require precision from imprecise controls. Heavy Dog is probably better because you can do this stupid shit, but they are poorly designed. Eggbreaker is definitely a bit better in terms of mid-game bosses, having to avoid the ground pound and... Oh, no, that's just it. Just the ground pound. He does have another move, but I found that he literally never uses it. I have to dock this 1 point, though, because of how annoying Eggman's fight chatter is.
You know what they say? The more the merrier. You know what they say? The more the merrier. The more the merrier. You know what they say?
The final bosses are a lot better, although still pretty dead. Sonic and Diablon, as well as Black Doom, are like very similar mechanically. You can't attack for most of the fight and have to wait for openings. With Black Doom, it's after an attack, and with Diablon, it's during an attack. I do like that the game has you use Sonic to reach its head though, that's actually quite fun. My favourite without a doubt is Egg Dealer, and not just because of my crippling gambling addiction, Patreon link below, but because this fight is really satisfying to play. It's not hard by any means, but the slot machine system feels really rewarding, and I also love how overly reliable the homing attack is in this fight. You'll just suction right onto those buttons. The aim is to activate the slots before Eggman does, which causes his machine to backfire in your favour, so there's a speed aspect to the battle too. I can't say I know why Eggman added a Shadow Fever slot to his own slot machine robot, but hey, I can't pretend to understand the mind of a psychopath.
Oh no, not Shadow Fever!
While the gameplay itself is subject to criticism often, it's really the story that earns this game its laughingstock status, partly because of its tactless writing.
Shadow, don't you remember? We once raced each other here.
Partly because that tactless writing is usually taken totally seriously to hilarious results.
This is like taking candy from a baby, which is fine by me.
It's been a long time, Shadow.
This planet was once saved from tyranny and annihilation by you two heroes.
Disgusting humans, out of my sight.
And hey, yeah, this game is very, very fucking funny. But let's get a little deeper, yeah? Let's take this narrative seriously for a second and pick it apart like little analysis vultures. The story is predicated on the idea of choosing your own outcome, of altering Shadow's morality based on what you're feeling, and it operates somewhat as a visual novel. Your choice in a stage leads to the next, and also to what story beat comes next, and because of this, there are a grand total of 326 different routes you can take through this game. And that is absolutely fucking insane. They're all named too in the library. A new one pops up every time you complete a new route, and so you can watch back that route's cutscenes in order. Don't get it twisted, there are only 10 endings, but you can get to those endings in whichever way you choose. In the description, I'll link to the site that details every single one and shows a chart of exactly what each route looks like, along with its name. It's super interesting. This is a huge undertaking, and at a stretch, I'd say they generally achieve stories that can work in these conditions. Your view of Shadow and the story can change depending on what route you take, and that's pretty remarkable. That said, I did say it was a stretch, because yeah, look, a lot of this is generally incomprehensible nonsense. Like I mentioned in the section on level design, the fact this is the structure means the cutscenes will also feel totally random and lack meaningful transitions, because it can't know where you came from. So you might do an evil level and then transition into a slightly less evil one, but it has no idea if you came from a neutral, hero, or dark level prior, and so it has to remain pretty static, and so you don't actually get any sense of growth from Shadow. You just get sudden changes in character between stages. There are no narrative events that will push him to be more eviler, just you doing corresponding missions, and it can feel a little bizarre. You end up having to fill in the gaps as headcanon to make it work, because otherwise it really is just things happening in an order, and I mean that in the most literal way it can be taken. The general story, despite which route you take or which ending you get, is Shadow finding himself, whether that leads to him being a hero or someone who will, and I quote, destroy this damn planet, and everything in between those two polar opposites. It is interesting though for a 2005 game to do this. For example, in the ending where he vows to destroy the planet, if you end up getting the hero ending of that route, it's slightly less evil, saying instead of blowing up the planet, he's just going to rule the whole universe, which is just as funny, but it's interesting that you get these slight differences. It does work to somewhat make your choices feel like they have direct impact, especially if you take the time to see what else could have happened, like killing Eggman.
What?
Goodbye, Doctor.
Or discovering he's maybe an android and ruling over a world of androids? Holy shit, is this Detroit Become Human? It's about as well written too. Realistically, to get the full picture of the story, you have to play every route. Not all 326, but the core routes. Pure Dark, Semi-Dark, Neutral, Semi-Hero, and Pure Hero, all of which have 2 endings. If you experience all of those, you'll have played every stage and also will have seen every cutscene. The other routes just allow you to mix and match however you feel. The teaming up with allies within missions also never feels organic. Because Shadow was never really friends with these guys, they just ended up as common allies when he realized his promise to Maria in Sonic Adventure 2, but they're like, oh, Shadow, can you help me with this obscure thing? And I can't help but feel like he'd say, no, fuck off. or words to that effect. Even with Black Doom, I don't get the sense Shadow would choose to do his bidding. He's very much out for himself, but more so out of like a fear of loss than anything else. Honestly, Shadow is kind of like Cloud from the first half of Final Fantasy VII. In the pure hero route, you end up teaming up with Sonic a fair bit, who at one point tells you how to unlock unlimited power.
With that Chaos Emerald, you can unlock unlimited power.
Which, okay man, what? Also, on the topic of Sonic, he is the most annoying little fucker in this game. Almost all of his lines are self-aware fourth wall breaks that indicate he's aware of the video game he exists within.
Guess that means welcome to the next level. Well, Shadow, it looks like we've reached the climax of this little game.
Why do they do this? It's so grating for no reason. Sonic is maybe the only character I can see Shadow teaming up with. They sort of have a mutual respect, although Shadow doesn't particularly remember the events of Sonic Adventure 2, as Sonic has to remind him they had a race on the Ark once, so I don't know.
Disgusting black creatures, get out of my sight.
On the entire flip side of this, you have Black Doom, who spends the entire game trying to get Shadow to do shit, and Shadow pretty much ignores him every time. Unless you do pure dark, Doom is flying around as his stupid little octopus eye thing and begging Shadow to find the Chaos Emeralds, and Shadow is just doing everything but that. At one point, Doom leverages Shadow's skin color to get him to do the evil things. Which feels, in a game about finding yourself and rejecting the preconceived notion that you are bad based on how you were born, I think that maybe evoking skin color at all was probably the wrong thing to do in the game. Doom wants the emeralds in order to use the Eclipse Cannon to eradicate humanity.
Instead, it will be used to destroy mankind.
But also, he wants to rule over them. I don't really know what he wants, actually. Sometimes he wants them all dead, sometimes he wants them to submit. He's really on the fence with that one. Although following that, he does use the piss laser on the Earth, which does the tiniest possible explosion. I was kind of expecting Death Star level destruction with all this talk, I can't lie. Shadow is probably the most funny on this route. The shit he says is just mental, and honestly, I think they were having such a laugh in the writer's room coming up with a lot of this shit.
Say your prayers, you disgusting humans. At last, the human resistance has been crushed.
I was created to bring order and justice to the humans. With the power of these emeralds, I'm going to destroy this damn planet.
You've obviously then got the neutral route, which is a lot more focused on Shadow himself and his own introspection, although is meddled with by Eggman, who basically convinces Shadow he's an android, as was set up in Sonic Heroes. He also spends a lot of this route having Genova headaches, so maybe he is a lot more like Cloud than we thought. Oh, the clones too, and the game is kind of like Dirge of Cerberus a little bit, isn't it? Wait, is this just part of the Final Fantasy VII compilation? It's as comprehensible, so it might as well be. The conclusion of this route is that Shadow died, and we are a copy and/or clone and/or android. Spoilers, this is false, and actually we are just the Shadow from Sonic Adventure 2, and Eggman retrieved his probably burnt and flattened corpse, and then fixed him up, and then he broke out in Heroes, and now he's finally looking for his true past and who he is, so we can return to the guy he was at the end of Sonic Adventure 2. None of this matters though, because hey, Sonic 06 basically starts a new canon anyway and never mentions any of this. Sonic didn't even acknowledge its past being one continuous canon until Generations, which made everything make no sense at all, and I'm tired, I'm really tired. So, like, what is the point of any of this? Is there a point? Well, I'm getting to that. While this all sounds like a total mess and an incoherent series of events that you can patch together in whatever ridiculous order you like, I'm gonna get a little pretentious on you here. I know, huge shocker coming from me, guy who talks about the profoundness of video games in front of a sunset guy, but you can artistically read the incoherence of this game as intentional. This game is an exploration of Shadow's broken memories, his sense of self lost, his past a blur. This game is an abstract representation of the what-ifs, the shadows that could have been, the good, the bad, the in-between, the flawed, the heroic, the ultimate life form. Shadow the Hedgehog's themes wouldn't work if the story was coherent. It has to be a complete mess for it to work. You're meant to feel confused. You're meant to have 326 possible options, and they're all meant to matter and not matter at the same time. This is why, to me, it feels futile to try and figure out which path through the game is canon or makes the most sense, because The true message of this game, the thing that it's trying to explore, is done by experiencing these events in strange and abstract orders, seeing every possible outcome and every possible person Shadow can be. That actually, this hedgehog is not made to be any one thing. He's autonomous and he is deeply alive. Maria's final words before she died were, "Bring hope to humanity." And I think that's what this game is about. It's about hope. The hope that you can be whoever you want regardless of your origin. You are never predisposed to anything at all. That said, I obviously did come up with my own route that I think is the best, but that's what's so interesting about this. Your perfect route and my perfect route are probably going to differ, and that's pretty fucking cool. That's if you have a perfect route in the 2005 game Shadow the Hedgehog. I think that's a pretty niche thing to have, actually. The likelihood is that I just have Stockholm Syndrome at this point, which I do have a habit of. My route, however, after however many goddamn playthroughs I did, and a brief talk on Discord about this very topic, is as follows. Westopolis, Digital Circuit, Prison Island, Mad Matrix, Lost Impact, Final Haunt, and the Black Doom boss. And this route is called For Love's Sake. And I think that's fucking awesome. Let me walk you through it. In the introduction, we learn that Shadow kinda isn't hugely fond of humans. That's how we start off. He has buried disdain, and that obviously comes from the death of Maria. He also can't remember who he is. When Doom shows up, he follows Doom out of a sense of direction. He finally has some sort of purpose, something he craves, and so he follows Doom to see where it'll take him, collecting the Chaos Emeralds and maybe discovering who he is, which takes us through the dark path of Westopolis and onto Digital Circuit. Here, Shadow teams up with Rouge to find the Chaos Emerald, the thing he needs to discover his past. So really, he doesn't need Doom, he just needs these emeralds. I think if I could, I'd have Shadow stay on the dark path until Cryptic Castle, but I think Lost Impact is heavily needed for this route to work, and so sadly, this is where we start to revert back onto the hero path. I had to make compromises somewhere. This path takes us to Prison Island, a location from Sonic Adventure 2 and Shadow's past that has him begin to remember elements of who he was. I'm not entirely sure why Shadow would choose to team up with Charmy. I feel like he'd probably flick him away like a little insect, but teaming up with Chaotix is important for the last story, and we also get this moment that I referenced earlier.
An assassin?
And Shadow hacks into Eggman's computer with a karate chop, which is incredibly epic. Onto Mad Matrix, Espio works as a way better character to convince Shadow of his heroism than Sonic does. Sonic is annoying and easy to brush off for a character like Shadow. Espio is a bit more of a grey Jedi. He's a thief, but he also has a good heart. He's a lot like Shadow in a lot of ways, and so a far better character to push Shadow towards doing the right thing.
There's nothing to tell, Shadow. You have no past.
What?
Don't listen to him. He's just trying to trick you. You've got to focus. Destroy him and let's get out of here.
We also get the moment here where Eggman lies about Shadow's past, making the reveal in the last story a bit of an actual twist. After this section, where Shadow seems to find resolve with Espio, we finally do team up with Sonic and head into space, but this moment is the catalyst for his flashback into Lost Impact, which, while a horrendous mission to play, it's tonally and narratively beautiful. The music isn't bombastic, it's so melancholy as you run around with Maria tracking down these escaped experiments, Gerald's mistakes, the cause of what ripped Shadow and Maria apart. This level gives Shadow major clarity going into Final Haunt. He has resolve, he has purpose for Maria, and he's ready to fight back against Black Doom, who's twisted his past to his own ends. Finally, facing off against Black Doom, the personification of Shadow's own self-doubt and trauma, is when he's able to banish the person he thinks he needs to be or was supposed to be, and can become the one he's meant to be or chooses to be. Is person the right word? I think this route is my favorite. Not that I've checked every route, but this is the one that resonated with me. I think it contributes everything it needs to. It has drama and stakes and self-doubt. It has the initial lean towards darkness only to bring it back to the light through Maria. I think this is awesome, and if I had to adapt Shadow's story in some way, this is probably the basis I'd use for what I'd write. Thankfully, I'll never have to do that, but if I did, now you know. I've spoken a little bit about the last story in this video, but I think it's finally time to tackle it. Sonic games tend to do this thing where when you complete every different story, you unlock a special final one, and it's no different with Shadow. When you complete all 10 endings, you unlock the last story, where we finally face off against Black Doom. It's weird because the games usually build to a final story, using the stories that exist to build upon one another into a culmination. This feels totally separate, and like nothing happened, and now everything is happening. The different routes feel like they can't exist simultaneously, yet you need to experience all of them to really get the full picture. It's a strange structure that artistically is still interesting, but like as an actual story, it is a fucking mess, let's not get it twisted. So anyway, Black Doom gasses everyone into a state of paralysis, The final mission is a bit of a shame. Sometimes these final missions do some really cool things, but here it's just a bit of a mashup of Black Comet and Final Haunt, and that's a bit shit. I do like how it forces you to use chaos control to proceed sometimes though, that's cool. Having to use Shadow's unique power to overcome the obstacles, I think that's thematically really nice actually. The final boss begins when Shadow confronts Doom. Doom essentially tries to convince Shadow he is predisposed to be evil because Doom's blood flows in his veins because he was responsible for creating Shadow with Gerald Robotnik. Yeah, I know, stay with me here. Gerald was trying to find the secret to immortality to save his granddaughter Maria from her illness, and in his weakness, turned to Black Doom to do so. In return for his help, he promised to create the ultimate life form to one day retrieve the Chaos Emeralds for Doom, which is why he came to Shadow at the very start of the game. I will say, I find it mildly amusing that before making Shadow, Gerald's first attempt ended up being a giant 20-foot lizard with no higher brain functions. Doom probably saw that thing and was like, come on man. I'm not a fucking idiot. It turns out Gerald actually made sure Shadow was the key to defeating Doom. The fact he shares his DNA means he's the only one possible to break free from his control and save the world. I quite like this on a thematic level. I mean, the idea that Shadow is breaking free from what felt like a life he was a slave to is meaningful in the context of the story. It's him grabbing back his autonomy and saying, this is my life no matter where I came from, ending a sense of generational trauma. He even says he puts his past behind him. Who he chooses to be is the most important thing. It's really nice actually. This is when he swipes the emeralds from Doom and activates them, transforming into Super Shadow to take on Devil Doom. This fight is sadly pretty lackluster. The music slaps, Shadow's theme from this game, I Am, and the fact it plays the little melody of Live and Learn when he turns super is fucking awesome. But the actual fight is pretty dead. You just shoot his eye on one side and then on the other side, all while collecting rings so that you don't die. Where the final fight in Sonic Adventure 2 sort of lives on the hype and the vibes of the whole thing, this fight is exciting for maybe 15 seconds, and then you realize it's 6 minutes of just doing this, and yeah, look, it's fine. Defeating Doom, we get this pretty awesome CGI sequence where Shadow sends the Black Comet back out into space to be shot by the Eclipse Cannon, fulfilling Gerald and Maria's wish. Knuckles has a little joke around with the guy who wants to do fascism on a regular basis, and the game ends with a scene of Shadow casting away a representation of his past and saying goodbye to Shadow the Hedgehog. I think this is a really nice way of showing Shadow saying goodbye to who he was, as if that's someone else. It's quite a powerful way of dealing with trauma. He doesn't remember that version of himself. He can't relate to that version of himself. He's someone else now. He's someone new, and so he bids farewell to that version of him that made promises, that had purpose thrust onto them. He now lives for himself. It's quite lovely. I think I'm gonna die on the hill of saying that's really fucking nice, actually. And that's Shadow the Hedgehog. Shadow is a really weird game. It's a time capsule, really, and I think for that, it's valuable. This game is 2005 incarnate, and channels some of the best parts of Sonic the Hedgehog, and plenty of the worst. In a lot of ways, this game is an artistic experiment, and I think that aspect of it, and that angle, is riveting to dissect. And that's probably why, even unknowingly, people still talk about this game all these years later. It's an anomaly, it's an oddity, and despite its issues, despite it being a little janky and broken and, well, kind of fucking stupid at times, this game feels earnest. Shadow the Hedgehog is not a good game, but it's not for lack of trying. Clearly, someone, a group of people, wanted to make something here. You could see it as a cynical cash-in on the popularity of Shadow, and of course it's that. Of course that element is there. But it's not void of soul, of heart, and of humanity. It takes risks and doesn't compromise itself, and in a way, isn't that what Shadow is all about? Isn't that what the character represents? Defining who you are for you and nobody else? This game sucks, and I love it. Thanks for watching.
And thank you everyone so much for watching. This tree is going to date this video probably in a matter of days. I won't do a big long outro like normal because this was hardly a major project or anything, but it was something that I wanted to make and that I think came together really nicely. I guess I am still doing every Sonic game, a video on all of them, just now not in order, just in a random order. And hopefully by the end of my hopefully illustrious career, I'll have made a video on every Sonic game at some point. It's no longer really a mission, it's just something I might do, possibly. If you want more Sonic, though, I have a video, like I said, in the video, it wasn't just a joke, it wasn't just a bit, on Shadow X Sonic Generations, the other way around, which I've really been enjoying. So if you want to check out, hear my thoughts and sort of analysis, critique, whatever it might be. I haven't finished sort of making it at all. Yeah, I actually haven't even started it. So that was a lie. I haven't even started making it yet. I don't know what it's going to be, but if you want to check that out, it is on Patreon, just at the $2 tier for the companion videos. So I make a companion video with every main channel upload I do, and $2 gets you access to that tier with all the companion videos. There are obviously extra things that I do that are on slightly higher tiers, but you know, that's you don't have to worry about that. And of course, a big thank you to my Patreon producers and Master Assassins, Cabbage, Dildog, Adam Barnes, Arenathon, Callum Theftmas Kelly, Damien the Not So Orange Gnome, Demi, Flash Paradox, Geekfam, Jake Ryan, Luke Pierce, Rolands, and Zeta. Thank you guys. I bloody love ya. I do have one final video to come out this year, the look back at 2024 and the games that I played that sort of made my year. I decided to make that a tradition last year, so now it's a thing. Every single game that I played this year that meant something to me or had an impact, I'll talk about in that video. Not just games that came out this year, just games that I played this year. So it's a wide range of different stuff. So that'll be fun. I'm looking forward to putting that one together. And of course, I am still working on my Assassin's Creed 2 retrospective remake, the first hour and 45 minutes of which is available currently on Patreon for VIP members. The first 35 minutes, I think it was, is available for Vault tier members as well. So if you want to see a little sneak peek at that before it's out, then you can catch the early previews and drafts on Patreon. My aim is to get that out before the end of January. Will I? Hopefully. But that's it from me for now. I hope you enjoyed the video on Shadow the Hedgehog. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd appreciate it, and I'll see you all for that end of the year video, and then Assassin's Creed 2 at the start of 2025. We're too far into the future at this point, and things have to cease. I don't like it. Not enjoying it. Not cool. Bad, actually. Very bad. Thanks, everyone. See you later. Bye-bye.